Hier ist die SDG Cube Launch live aus Köln und die Gelegenheit, jetzt wieder auch Fragen zu stellen an meine Gäste, die hier gleich ein Projekt namens Preval.
You will have the opportunity to ask questions to the people who will introduce the next project. We are going to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals agreed upon in 2015 in the form of the Agenda 2030, and the global community took responsibility to achieve these goals jointly to keep the sustenance of our lives. These goals contain no poverty, no hunger, wealth and well-being, and 14 others. I won't go into detail now. I'm not going to talk so much about this. I'll introduce my guests instead. Great to see you all. Everybody is joining us safely from home. We're talking about the project called Preval. Dr. Julian Jung, I'll start with you. We can see him at the center. He's head of the research group Radicalization in the state of Hesse, the Foundation on Peace and Conflict Research, and he's head of the Berlin branch. Then we have Mona Klöckner, bottom left, psychologist, and since May 2020, research fellow at the Hessian Foundation for Peace and Conflict Research. She's working on Project Preval and preventing extremism. Lisa Neef, hello, top right corner. She's a sociologist since 2019. She's been working for North Rhine-Westphalia. She is working on signpost against Islamic fundamentalism and running a program called API to counter extremist Islamic developments. Dr. Götz Nordbruch, top left, hello, Islam researcher and founder of the of ufuk.de. His research areas are Islam, radical Islam, use of social media of young Muslims, and the influence of school and outside school sources on radical Islam. And our last guest, research fellow at Leibniz-Institut, Hessian Foundation for Peace and Conflict Research. Her research focus is on measures on evaluating extremism prevention and political education and networking of research programs countering radical Islam. Dr. Jung, what exactly is Preval, your project? We are a project that is an offer to start a dialogue and engage in it. Everybody who's taking part in extremism prevention and are looking at questions of education and evaluation and quality assurance. We have two columns of our work. One is looking at the needs and capacities we have in Germany for this, and the other one, that's what we're talking about today, and that's also the heart of our project, is that we want to work together with other scientists developing evaluation designs. And the measures we're looking at are often very complex and multi-layered. So thinking about how to evaluate them together is all the more important. Thank you so much. And once again, sorry, maybe some of you heard this twice now, but I actually just heard it for the first time. Luckily, I know what this is about. So how did this project come into being? The project was born in a long process. In Germany, we have a lot of exchange platforms and workshops and meetings on how important evaluation and quality assurance are and how professional they are becoming. But we got the impression that in certain areas that are especially complex, for example, political education and primary prevention, it would be good to look at concrete issues and not consider the abstract level. So we suggested to the Ministry of the Interior to create a project incorporating a huge network in Germany, consisting of different partners and experts and scientists and academics to think about evaluation together, especially in these complex contexts. Later, our colleagues we just saw are going to talk about concrete issues. We'll give you 2 examples on political education and primary prevention, how we work together and what opportunities this created, and an example from secondary and tertiary prevention. What's important to us at Preval, if you allow me to say 2 more sentences, we are agnostically, we have an agnostic approach to different areas of prevention, from right-wing extremism to religious extremism. We are looking at the needs and at all kinds of approaches. So that already makes it clear that I'm saying this, that we have the need to fight this issue. And we believe that there's a certain issue we want to know about, that there's also a set of methods that can be used for it. And it's always target-oriented. We want measures to be effective, and we want to measure their effectiveness. And obviously, we want to develop good evaluation methods. So what exactly is the goal of the project? Where exactly are you going with it? Where we're going is that we want to know what's the reality right now, what methods do we have, what is the knowledge we have right now on evaluation methods, and secondly, we want concrete experiences and studies describing how we can improve the field of evaluation, maybe in areas that have not been so easy to evaluate. We don't want to keep the limitations and challenges from you, but we want to look at them and name them. So, and it's always different to work with scientists or to work with actual players on site. After 1 year of project work, we can say it's definitely worth to invest a lot of time in evaluation and in the dialogue about it, the conversation. It takes time to build up trust and to actually think about this together, but creating this time and space is important. We'll talk about why it can be difficult, and that's the message I'd like to give you here, and the input I'd like to add to the debate, how we can use concrete methods and processes in this field. That's our goal, and in the next few years you'll see a lot of studies from us. They'll be published bit by bit on our website. You just said your platform for dialogue, that's what we are too. So everybody looking at this out there, if you have questions about this project or to individual participants in this panel, just send them to us on whatever platform you're watching this. I can pass them on. So please ask questions anytime. So let's discuss some concrete issues. A project Ms. Tultschinetski and Dr. Nordbruch are working on. What is the project about? Mr. Nordbruch and I are working on this together with other colleagues from the academic world and from practical life to develop evaluation design for measures and projects of primary prevention and political education. There's a few projects. We're looking at ufug.de and the Berlin office and projects of political education in young delinquents.
Wie genau machen Sie das?
Crime fighting. So we're doing this in a similar way we are meeting in right now in a digital way and talk to each other about what these projects are about, what their challenges are, and how evaluation can support them improve their work. Do you have any results yet or any findings you can already present? We can say about our project that there's huge differences between different measures and projects that depend on the goals of the measures, but also on the structures these projects are embedded in that have concrete implications on their implementation and also on evaluation and quality assurance. Dr. Nordbruch, can you explain what exactly your organization does? What are your concrete goals? We are an association working since 2007 on political education and Islam and people. And so we're working on educating young people, but also training staff to educate them to prevent young people from falling into extremist Islamic organizations. We try out models and try to transfer the structures of talking that we use so that others can take on these approaches and benefit from it. So the project Preval is very helpful to us because it looks at it from the outside, and it's a possibility to look at what approaches are working well and what are the problems with them where we are facing challenges, so we can readjust our approaches. I think this combination of science and practical reality, especially in evaluation and quality assurance, is very promising for us. So I assume your projects were also evaluated beforehand. What exactly would you like to do different or better? So the projects were evaluated before, but they were just punctual evaluations from individual measures or something. So with the Preval project, we have our research office is part of it. So the Berlin Senate is supporting this, and but it's only financially secure for 2 years at a time. And in that office, we're trying to put together different areas of work that we've developed over the past 10 years in Berlin. So there's offers for young people, there's trainings and qualification measures for teachers, and materials that we're creating. And these 3 areas since 2020 have been put together in one place. And in Preval, we're trying to find an evaluation design to make sure that we are covering the demands of teachers or of staff. Are the ideas that we've developed actually suited to the needs of a teacher or a social worker in Berlin? That's one thing. And the other thing is we want to find out where do we fail? The trainings we offer, why don't they reach the target groups maybe or not as well as we were hoping? Why aren't we not able to combine the workshops for young people with the trainings for social workers and teachers? We want to combine them to sustainably make them function and take effect. So we've developed this since 2020. It's not been running that smoothly, but at least we've set it up. We want an evaluation design to make sure that while these projects are running, we can find out whether we are meeting the demands and actually reaching the target groups, so we can readjust things if needed. So that's interesting. How exactly are you trying to achieve this? I imagine that it's very difficult because you rarely find a monocausal connection saying this measure has had this effect, kept this and this person from doing a certain thing. I'm imagining that that the reality of it is that it's difficult to determine. Either of you can answer this. How do you approach this issue? So maybe just briefly, in this project area where it's about UFUG, the UFUG office in Berlin, it's not about a direct effect evaluation, but we want to look at whether we are meeting demands and reaching target groups. So there will be, so teachers will be questioned, or social workers, to hear from the target groups what are their needs in the spring of 2020. Are our UFUG office offers known? Are they being used? And if so, why or why not? That's one central question complex in this evaluation design. In the other projects, for example, on the crime persecution, maybe you can answer this. There's more on the effects of individual methods. Yes, because this area of crime prevention and prosecution is very young, we have mainly model projects. So people go out into the field and try out approaches, but whether they actually work is a very broad question, and so we have to answer it with broad methods. So we need a variety of methods and need to stay open to different approaches, because persecution carries certain challenges and make it different from the rules of school education work, for example. So that has to be considered in evaluation. So can you tell us, in law enforcement for young people, what would you like to evaluate better? So right now we're working with two projects that are very low threshold offers for political education and prosecution, criminal prosecution of young people. One chose the route of football. So football is basically the entrance point of talking about political issues. The other project we're working with in Preval has a media education approach using German rap music. So the projects go into prisons and make offers for different groups and offer different modules and work with young people, talk to them, and try to broach subjects of political education. Very good examples. So how can we picture this? Maybe you can explain why it's so difficult afterwards to say how well this worked. Well, for one thing, political education projects have very broadly worded goals. So it's not easy to use standard scientific methods to describe them. There's not one criterion you can use to measure whether this project was successful or not. You can't go into a prison and give them a questionnaire that then tells you, oh, this person has gained a greater ability to reflect than before. Those are challenges in political education and primary prevention that you see in many projects in this field. You know, the effectiveness is not so easy to determine. Ms. Klöckner and Ms. Neef, I'd like to ask you, you've only been listening so far. You two are working in a slightly different area of prevention. Ms. Klöckner, can you explain in what area you're working? Sure. We are basically doing the same. We are also working with other colleagues on a pilot study on secondary and tertiary prevention, a level where it's about individuals that already are at risk of being radicalized or with a radicalized background. So the project we can talk about today, that we're working on today, is the project Islamism, where people are helped to get out of the radical Islamic scene and find their way back into democratic society. How exactly does this project work? So the getting out of extremism, Islamic extremism, my colleague can tell you more about this. I can tell you more about evaluation design. Okay, Ms. Neef, what exactly do you do in this project? So the getting out of Islamic extremism is connected to the Ministry of the Interior in North Rhine-Westphalia, secondary and tertiary prevention, and we're looking at the Islamic spectrum of people. So we accompany people that are extremist or like moving in extremist circles and want to help them get back into society. We have a lot of different experts, social workers, psychologists, law experts. So we have lots of experts, and we have two major goals. And that's also what Preval accompanies ideologic work. So we go there and talk to clients about ideology, and we question their ideology, work on this issue. And the second area is stabilization, which is essential for giving a person back their stability to function within society sustainably. So basically that's the API, and we've come together basically because I was working on evaluation in this office, and the Preval team has approached me, and as I have a scientific academic background, I find it very important that we work together and benefit from each other's work. That was the greatest benefit of the project for me. So what's your hope for this? You've been doing this for a while. Is your hope that you can evaluate better so you can improve these getting out of extremism programs? Yes, definitely. That's one point. That's my primary interest because it's basically my job. But I also find it important because you can raise this to a higher level by making a contribution that as safety administrators we want to make. And we have a very successful getting out of Islamist extremism program. So we want to participate in the research on it. We want to create a discourse, and where we can, we are working a lot with science and academia. And what I can say, it's not a one-sided thing, but I have really benefited from this. Our evaluation is going to benefit hugely from this. So I really think it's important to have a conversation and benefit from each other. So both are in my interest, and it's easy to connect the two. So when you say you've already benefited from it, can you tell us what you've already learned or what you would like to improve? I can say two sentences about what we've done together. Maybe we can talk about this in more detail later. We basically looked at, the Preval team approached me at a very good point in time because I was looking at the evaluation. I was preparing it And I was really open to any kind of results so that we could take that as a starting point, look at the expectations we had and bring them together. So me with my look at my reality-centered approach, I could tell the others about my expectations because I'm rooted in practical reality, and the pre-val team brought in the scientific, the academic viewpoint, and a very intense exchange and a very fruitful exchange that we've yielded there. So the point in time we came together during the process was very good, and then we approached each other and looked at concrete evaluation questions. How can we record them, with what methods, based on what data? It sounds like not a lot, but practically it's very extensive because a lot of things play a role. And that was the core of our work, that we looked at how can we achieve a good evaluation design for tertiary prevention. In my case, it's targeted at API, but obviously I'm sure you can use it for other get out of extremism programs by making small adjustments. Ms. Klöckner, I'm sure you contributed to this greatly. How did you manage to do that? Yes, the cooperation took place online mainly, but that allowed very regular meetings and enabled us to approach each other step by step in the sense of developing a common language. So we, there's two sides bringing in a lot of knowledge and competencies. The evaluation side brings in the methodology, and the practical side brings a lot of relevant practical knowledge and empirical knowledge and the context in which we want to, in which the evaluation results become relevant. So from the beginning, we took the time to embrace this open approach by the API. And the question we want to look at is we want to measure the effectiveness. What exact questions do we want to ask? And how can we measure the effects we want to look at? And after a few weeks, we can move on from the questions we have identified to the possible evaluation methods. And it's a process that has to move ahead in this way, I think, because any further steps can only be built upon the first steps. The special thing about our situation, as Ms. Neef said, that she was preparing evaluations, which means there was a goal to develop a joint image or idea of how evaluations could be done. So we had a certain sense of freedom that you sometimes don't have in a concrete evaluation. We had resources, also thanks to Ms. Neef's position. All these were special conditions that enabled us to work together very well and enabled us to be very concrete and successful over 3-4 months. We talked to each other every 4 to 6 weeks and prepared the next meeting and reflected on the last one, whether we understood each other correctly, because sometimes you talk about the same thing, but you mean something else. Once again, I'd like to ask you, I imagine it to be difficult to measure exactly whether a certain measure has actually been effective or not, because I believe the people working in these getting out of extremism programs and probably have like a gut feeling of whether they've managed to get somebody out of the scene, short or long term. But how can you scientifically pinpoint these numbers, whether it has actually worked or not? I think the first important step is to to say goodbye to the possibility of answering this question with yes or no. I think we have to say goodbye to this idea and look at details to find out what concrete assumptions we're making. Prevention is very broad, can mean something completely different in one context than in another. So there's different levels you can look at. We can say we want as many individuals as possible to make a successful exit. That's difficult to grasp, but we can also say maybe we want people to part with certain convictions. So that's easier to determine how effective it was in that sense. And then it's important how to make it measurable and how we can actually get concrete numbers and collect concrete data. So then we can talk to people working in the field. We can look at the documentation of the cases and look at indicators on effectiveness, or we can actually look at a certain question, what works in what way, and then compare that to what we were, what our goals were, and then you can adjust bit by bit. You can adjust the evaluation design to reality. Once again, please ask questions anytime. So far, I haven't seen any questions from our participants, but let me just mention again, if you have questions on this project or on evaluation design or whatever, just comment on whatever platform you're watching us and we can pass on your questions. What else are you trying to get young people or problematic individuals to reach them? Talking, for example, influencer videos as a key term. Can you talk about this, Mr. Tultschinetski? Yes, I thought you meant me. So, as we said earlier, primary prevention and political education is a very broad issue, a broad area, which has different target groups. And you have to look very precisely where you can reach these target groups and how. So over the past few years, I don't have to tell anybody, a lot of people are moving in the digital space, especially young people who are often target groups for political education offers. And so right now there's a lot of offers being developed in the format of web videos using YouTube and other platforms, and wanting to create content and offer content to young people and broader target groups as well. But once again, it sounds like, okay, well, we can just make a video that's good for young people. It's easy. But in concrete terms, it's difficult. Only because you've created a video doesn't mean that people find it or watch it. And B, and C, it doesn't mean people actually take it seriously or accept what you're trying to communicate. It depends on how appealing it is. How do you find it? Do friends tell each other about it? How do you approach that issue? Those are exactly the questions we ask ourselves in this project in cooperation with the Ministry for Political Education. So we're looking at a project on fake news and misinformation. So we're trying to tackle these questions. How do we know whether we've reached the target group we have addressed? How do we know whether the formats we've created are received, and how far we've hit the right note and chosen the right people to cooperate on creating this? So that's the state we're in right now. And what subjects do you tackle in these videos? Can you give us some examples? So in the web video project, it's about misinformation and fake news, and about how you can recognize them and how you can maybe work against the spread of such information, misinformation. Maybe Dr. Nordbruch can expand on that. Yes, I saw you raise your hand. Sure, I'd like to add something, because it shows where the added value of such a project lies. So the media education issue, for example, satire. How do you create satire, or a speaker who's not from the target group, who's not a member of the target group? How does that work? Or how does peer education work? There are some research results on this question. So how does satire work, for example? How effective is it? But if we, as a small organization, if we want a media education project, it's not easy to actually have all this research available or use all of it. But to me, one benefit of this project, or one result that we've already seen, is that it's like a colloquium that brings people together. We have a regular exchange with the pre-val team, and they are bringing this expertise into the practical context. We don't have to read up on all of this. We can just talk to the pre-val team and to find out what research exists, what findings exist on evaluation strategies, how do media education projects have to be designed so that they can work or be effective. We can use and access all this knowledge, and that's a great benefit. I think otherwise it's very difficult for our kind of organization to draw from these kind of findings, even if they are around. And it's not so much about a top-down approach, you know, of academia spitting out knowledge into the practical world. I think it's an exchange. I think scientists benefit from this too, and but it's supplementary. And this is something that, from my view, is usually not done enough. Okay, so I just saw we got one question. I'd like to ask this to all of you. The question is, are there differences in the development of evaluation design in different levels of prevention? Anyone who wants to answer this? Any volunteers? Definitely, but the point is that evaluation design is already different, even within a single level. If you have a model project supported by the Ministry of, or like supported for a year by the Ministry of Political Education, you need a different evaluation method from a project that's funded for 5 years by a huge state campaign. So the goal you want and the results you want to transfer to future practical projects are important. So in my project, pre-val project, the evaluation design is always it depends a lot on the concrete project you're trying to, or the concrete program you want to evaluate. And if you look at different levels of prevention, obviously the differences are going to be even greater. Dr. Jung, you wanted to add something? Yes, I would have said something similar, not as well, but I have just as the basic remark that we're working in an area where people are trying to find easy answers, but as Dr. Nordbruch said, for certain problems there's certain instruments to deal with them, and this sensitivity to context and to the specific needs is very important, and there's many dimensions that play a role. So how is the project funded? what field am I moving in, and what is the goal of those funding this project? We have external evaluation, we have internal evaluation. So we have to deal with all these different requirements rather than offering general principles. We want to make knowledge graspable and accessible. It's not easy in this field. That's the decisive factor. And that's where we need dialogue and exchange. And at Preval, we also want to sow the seeds to keep improving this. We have a lot of great evaluation organizations, but how do we open up these resources? How do we make sure the right people have access to them? So we want to move ahead in this direction. And we don't want to emphasize the differences. Mona Klöckner put this very nicely. It's always about these dichotomies, and but we'd like to address individual details. It's in a practical sense, it's very relevant. Thank you so much also for the question. Now, there was another question concerning what we talked about earlier. So in concrete terms, what are the differences? Dr. Nordbruch, you tried to explain this already. Anybody else who'd like to go into detail? Somebody else, maybe Ms. Klöckner, okay? Go for it. Sure. I'll try, but I think it's a question that we should answer together because we're working on different levels of prevention. But one thing that has been mentioned already is the concrete activities and effects in political education. Primary prevention is much broader. And I can talk more about secondary or tertiary prevention. We have to, there's more pressure from the public. So we have to prevent specific things, which is another problem for evaluation in extremism prevention. Practically speaking, we want to achieve something that is not. We want to make sure something does not happen, or that the opposite of a certain thing happens. So we have to maybe reverse our statement and put this positive goal into words. We can focus on, yes, that's a typical dilemma. If you're doing a great job, then everything is safe and there's no worries at all. At the same time, then everybody wonders, why are they doing this for? What are they doing all day long? So once again, thank you for your questions. Please ask questions anytime. We'll pass them on. Another question to Ms. Neef. If you talk to people, you want to persuade to get out of the extremist scene, imagine it to be very difficult to establish a relationship of trust with them. I personally don't do that. I'm not working in that field. My colleagues, I have colleagues doing that. At API, we have an approach of actively approaching people. So we actively talk to potential clients, and not every program does this. It's a difference in approaches. So we talk to people and ask them whether they're interested to get to know us. It's social work, basically, we're doing with our clients. I think it's no different from, you know, like imagine you're trying to get in touch with people who have any kind of problems. It's about establishing contact and trust through talking to people, getting to know the person, and understanding what troubles them. I think that's the main point. It's not, first of all, to talk about ideology. This usually happens after a long time of knowing somebody, that you get to the point where you ask a person, okay, what's your view of things? Can we discuss this? That's based on a relationship of trust. So the first factor is social stabilization, that actually is achieved by establishing a relationship of trust with clients. So our social workers spend an average of 3 to 5 years with individuals, and that's how you step by step you approach the challenges of daily life and make progress. Dr. Jung, you wanted to add something. Yes, I wanted to support this, naming a different study we did at Preval, where we put the person willing to leave an extremist field at the center. So what networks are at play? It's very interesting to ask yourself that question, because it's not a program you're evaluating, but Ms. Neef said this, it's a lot of informal stuff you can't really document. So building up trust, for example, we're talking to some social workers, some consulting prevention programs. You know, like having coffee together is very important, for example, to build up trust, but it's often not documented. So how do you put this into evaluation methods? And there's like certain careers of people working in different projects. How do we know what combination is at play if we're only evaluating one project? Just you know, to add to what Ms. Neef said, there's interesting questions. And as Dr. Nordbruch also said, in primary prevention and universal prevention and political education, we have similar complexities. How can we isolate one project? We have, you know, sometimes like we'll have a small number of cases in primary prevention and huge numbers in secondary and tertiary prevention. Although it feels like we're facing similar challenges. So I'd like to encourage everybody to think about these basic things. But obviously it takes some time and experience to get there. And it means projects need to create the space and time for themselves to do this, and that they are allowed to do this. Sorry, Mona, you wanted to add something.
Ja, ohne Ihnen jetzt die Möglichkeit von spannenden Fragen zu nehmen, wollte ich kurz
Mr. Ebner,
etwas aufgreifen,
I'd like to add to something Dr. Jung said and Ms. Neef said. Building up trust is something that in secondary and tertiary prevention is even more relevant probably than in primary prevention, but it's has the same value everywhere, the relationship between the social worker and the client. And we need to protect this relationship because it's so important to the reality of prevention work, and also in evaluation practice. We don't want to disclose things so we don't endanger this relationship or this process. This is something you also need to consider, and something that social workers think about when we talk about evaluation. This is something I've learned from this process that we have engaged in, this talk with each other. It was very important for evaluation design that we've worked out together, that social workers were able to join us and bring in their expertise and knew what we were thinking about, so they didn't have to fear data being disclosed that may be important to be kept private, or to be protected from disclosure. And Ms. Tultschinetski, you wanted to add something, and then we have another question I'd like to ask. Yes, Ms. Klöckner and Dr. Jung mentioned this already, and I'd like to explain or show that in primary prevention and political education, it's also very important, this relationship of trust, and also especially if you look at criminal prosecution, just like in other areas, when you work closely with clients, there's issues and subjects of trust being discussed, and confidentiality, maybe imbalances of power. So in evaluations as well, you cannot use traditional methods all the time. You can't just go in and look at the program and decide how it worked, because clients or participants in criminal persecution are very sensitive to such outside influences, much more so than at schools or other areas. And that's a major challenge to finding out whether these programs are working out, whether they are effective, and whether participants liked the programs, because you can't just walk in there and make people talk about this. That makes the whole thing much more difficult. Yes, I can imagine, especially in prisons and crime prosecution. So we've got two questions in the meantime. First of all, when you develop evaluation methods together, what is the most important step from a scientific and from a practical perspective? Ms. Neef, go ahead. What I can say is that to me the most important step has been to look at these different dimensions and bring them together. Here we have a luxury position, having a job like mine. A lot of programs don't have somebody who has the luxury to dedicate 100% of their time to this. For me, that's been the greatest benefit, that your thoughts on evaluation, together with all the consequences, especially in the political ministry or in programs that are do not have long-term funding. I think it's the most important thing to go in there with your own expectations and discuss it with the team. And there's lots of processes going on that you can communicate to the team. So, concrete example, we had a pre-bow video call and talked about the next steps. So, and I'm talking to the API team, I take it home myself, and I go back to the pre-bow team and process the whole thing into a new idea for research design. So this close exchange with people working academically, scientifically, and up to date on current knowledge, and who engage in an academic exchange with others on their level. That's what I benefited from the most personally. And to take it one step further, this gain is not just for preparing the evaluation this time, but it's something that I'll take with me in the entire process for the next time. And I think it can have huge benefits to anybody working on this right now. They can read about our results and gain knowledge from it. So for me, it was very important to see how important it was to get all stakeholders involved. You have so many different views, different expectations that you have to take on board, and how important communication actually is. What Mona Klöckner said in the beginning, only if you think the other person knows what you're talking about, that's not necessarily the case. And especially in a context where you have lots of different experts, not everybody knows the terminology of evaluation. I don't always know this, my colleagues don't always know this, and that's where it's very important to work together and ask questions. And it's also about trust inside the team. If I have trust, if I strengthen my trust in evaluation, that is something that our social workers transfer to their clients. Maybe they have to participate in evaluation through interviews or whatever. So that's also very important, to take everybody involved on board and transparently discuss these processes, because evaluation is always associated with fear too. Thank you, Ms. Neef. We have two further questions. Let me ask them to everybody. And how far are Preval's approaches different from existing projects such as Demokratie leben, living democracy? So actually we're not trying to be different. We're working with Demokratie leben, with the program of living democracy. You know, this German Institute for young people's work. I think we're all working together on improving the evaluation landscape and improving processes of evaluation and giving some input to them. But I believe as Preval, by being independent of other programs, and you know, by creating this huge network and talking to so many different people, and also through our academic freedom to think about things and motivate others to think about things, that makes us different, because we don't have, we've not been commissioned to do one evaluation, but we reflect on evaluation as a whole. Other people in Germany are doing this too. You know, we're not alone in this, but we're engaged in an exchange with all of them and find a new structure. But maybe that's an important point. It means you're not another black box, but as you say in software, you're like kind of like an open source creator. So you say, oh, look, we've thought about it and we've done it this way, and you can do it in a similar way, but you don't have to. Is that correct? Absolutely, yes. Let's take this this word, this open source terminology on board. There's a few basic things. You need to be modest and admit that you don't know everything. You know, even if it says independent of universities, independent research organ, you need to admit you don't know everything. The other thing is transparency. That's an open source principle. Obviously, there's limits to that. There's data protection, privacy protection, ethics, etc. We've discussed this. All of this plays a role in this area, but you can build upon each other's knowledge and improve processes. That requires, however, that you know what happens in Demokratie leben or in other programs, what knowledge they have built up. And I think we're on the right path overall. You know, we're a huge building block of this exchange landscape. One more question. What is the best approach to actually transfer the results of evaluations into the practical world? Ms. Klöckner. Yes, that's a point that I think we've already kind of discussed whenever we said there's stakeholders being involved. Through that, there's a perspective on evaluation where people know what to expect, and also it makes them more active in the process or in creating and participating in the process. I think transferring results, maybe I'll let my colleagues answer this. I'll just say one more sentence. Transferring the results to the practical world is not the same as like using results. So I think we don't just write an evaluation report, but we keep working together and we discuss the results and interpret them together. And you have more opportunities to interpret them, or different opportunities, if you're coming from a practical perspective. And the evaluators themselves can't make as much sense of the results as the people working in the practical field, for example. So that's something important I'd like to contribute. Ms. Tultschinetski. Yes, I'd like to take a few steps back and then talk about another question that was asked earlier. What is the most important step in developing design? And I believe it's a lot about how you word the questions and working that out together with people working in the practical field. What questions can we answer that will help you improve your methods, your projects, you know, rather than trying to evaluate a question that the practical world has no use for. So let's think together about what is important to your work, what are the challenges you're facing, how can we translate that into an evaluation question, and what methods can we use to realistically answer this question so that we can actually use and apply the answers we get. And I think an important point is the language, the wording. Wording results in a way that allows people that have to work with them to actually work with them and use them effectively. Thank you so much. We have no further questions from our audience, from our participants, everybody watching the stream. Thank you so much for these interesting, detailed questions. Thank you to the panelists for taking the time to give us insights into your work, although there's a lot more to be said on this, I'm sure, but at least we got some idea of what you are working on and what you're thinking about, and that there's a possibility to engage in an exchange. Obviously, to the situation we're all in, it's difficult to network here on site, but I'd like to say that all our panelists will be happy to hear from you in whatever way, online or whatever. Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Neef, Ms. Tultschinetski, Ms. Klöckner, Dr. Nordbruch, and Dr. Jung, to introduce the project Preval. That was the SDG Cube Lounge. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for watching. Bye.